we're moving on to our first panel discussion today, which is on housing delivery and beyond, and is moderated by Jamie Fitzmaurice, partner with Mason Hayes & Curran, and his panellists are Arlene van Bosch, Senior Development Manager with the Land Development Agency, Miguel Fitzgerald, Real Estate Investment Director with Greystar Ireland, and James Ronan, Chief Development Officer with Ronan Group Real Estate. But just before we kick off with the panel, we're just going to ask another poll question, which you'll be able to access via your app, and this is: does modular housing have the ability to make a significant contribution to the current housing crisis? And it's a very simple yes or no. Now, over to you, Jamie.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, everybody, and you're very welcome to the first of our panels this morning, a panel which I have titled the most important one today, although I'm sure subsequent moderators and panelists might disagree with that. I think Cullum and Ronan rather, have teed up all of the panels nicely for today and set the tone very, very carefully, but in particular, I think, for this panel. So I think perhaps, James, what I might do is just jump straight into yourself. At this conference last year, albeit in a different venue, a number of your industry colleagues were discussing some of the small challenges, small details that were facing the market at that stage: war in Ukraine, COVID, inflation, nothing important. I suppose, how have the last 12 months fared? Are those challenges gone? Are you facing new challenges?
Well, I don't think the challenges are gone at all. I think they kind of more or less culminated into that kind of what was touched on there, hyperinflationary period, which has hopefully abated now to a certain extent, with inflation rates going down, as we've seen with the interest rates going up and that. So hopefully that is coming under control. But in terms of actually deliverability, cost of construction, from what we're seeing, which is positive in some recent contractor tenders we've got back, is I think that risk premium that was being put on top of contracts from, which didn't know what those, say, the war in Ukraine and COVID probably latterly were going to do to the market and what we're going to do to the construction costs the contractors are going to be facing. I think there's a big risk premium being put on contracts from that point of view. So I think we know more now of the impacts that's actually having on the market. So that risk premium has, really abated, which is a good thing, and we're seeing it in our tender prices that we've got back for some of our larger projects, which is, really positive. It's not where we'd want it, but it's definitely better where it was a year ago. Then another sort of issue that we think is sort of top of the agenda now, and it probably was an issue last year, but probably not in the top sort of 3 or 4 you mentioned there, but and again, I think Colm touched on it, is the sort of planning system and the length of time it takes to get applications through the system. I think there's 33,000 plus potential residential units stuck in on board Pernal at the moment. And, if we're going to have any go anywhere near delivering the type of units that we need to over the next, decade or so, that needs to be a bottleneck that's unlocked ASAP. Like our company alone has had a couple of projects in with on board Pernal for over 2 years. And, at the end of that, you could get a refusal, which we have, and I'm not here debating the merits of an actual project and getting a grant or a refusal. It's more the time it takes to get to that point, and the resources that, that go into that could be gone elsewhere. You could almost be through the system twice and get a refusal and a grant again in that time period if the system was working properly. But again, those resources could go elsewhere and could be delivering housing in that time, whereas all we're doing really is sitting on our hands in that period. So I think that's a real, crux of an issue that needs to be dealt with as soon as possible, in our view.
And I presume, Miguel, as your experience being somewhat similar, but what's the biggest issue facing you at the moment? Is it kind of inflation, capacity, uncertainty?
Before I jump into that, I'd maybe just the housing system as a whole, what I've seen recently, my concern would be about commencements. I think Ronan hit on it earlier, but CSO came out this week with a figure shy of 10,000 units for year to date till April. Certainly annualised, that's kind of the 30-odd thousand that we need, but if you dig deeper, certainly it seems to be 40 or 50. Ronan, or certainly Dr. Brian Hughes from TU Dublin pointed to around 50 as well, so 50,000 units. We are shy, we are continuing continuing to increase that capacity, but it's certainly my biggest worry from the housing system in general. We could hit on the negative points, and I certainly agree with what James is saying, but ignoring inflation and COVID and war and the rest of it, if we focus on maybe how to positively, constructively move forward, if we take a demographics-based approach like Ronan was indicating, and perhaps look to what types of homes we need and where, that's where my head is at. And certainly, maybe just to point to two in our world, in rental housing, one of them is our approach in relation to a new development we've put in a permission in Monkstown. We've certainly allowed for a block there to be one of our US models, which is called Active Elder. So it's focused on community and social life for people of 55 years or older. So it's incredibly popular in the US, and it's something we see as a really positive addition to the residential landscape in Ireland. And then if you look at what that does as an after effect, it's a downsizer market product. So it frees up larger homes for starter families and for established families in that same area. So it's really allowing for that colloquial nature of Irish society and allow for people to move within their own environment, as well as freeing up stock and allow for a more efficient use of that residential that's already in place. And the second one I'd point to maybe is just a fact-based approach in terms of what we build in reality. So if we look at car parking and the schemes we have operational to date, it's around 600 odd units. Less than a third of our units, and it's a two-bed-led scheme, so you might have 3 or 4 people in a unit, less than a third of the units are occupying car parking spaces. So we're building these large basements, typically in residential assets, that are now becoming quite empty spaces, quite useless spaces, that it takes time, it takes money, it takes effort, the carbon effect of that. It's just really costly and inefficient to deliver things that aren't needed based on fact. So I suppose what I'm trying to get at is maybe we constructively look at real estate and say, what's the demographic need? What's the factual use of these buildings? And apply that into our planning system.
Okay. And Arlene, in the LDA, are you facing the same issues? Are you insulated from them, or do you have other issues on top of all of those?
Well, I think first of all, it's reassuring to know that we face similar challenges to both Miguel and Jamie here on the panel today. Planning, viability, funding, that's inherent in every development. So that's always going to present challenges. For us at the Land Development Agency, I guess maybe a more unique challenge will be that marrying of affordability. So we'll always have to look at what the purchasing power of the general public is. We'll have to look at their salaries, what their savings are, what is their purchasing power in the market. Then we have to look at what the prevailing market is doing. What are the sales rates, what's the prevailing rents. And then we also have to look at cost of delivery. And I know that this was touched on in the earlier session this morning, but it is expensive to deliver homes where they are needed. So the 1 and the 2 beds apartment blocks are more expensive to deliver in the market. So we have to always drive that affordable. It has to be at the forefront, basically, of every decision that we make. How can we keep management costs down? How can we keep maintenance costs down? How can we deliver quality and balance it with that? So, that's always, that's a common theme that runs through every decision that we have to make at the agency, because we have to provide sustainable housing solutions there. Another one that we have, and I'm sure all developers or property people in the room have, is how can we ramp up what the delivery is? How can we deliver at pace? So, we're all aware of what's going on in the media, the headlines about the housing need and the demand. We're probably behind our targets, but how do we ramp up and get better efficiency and feed that pipeline and make sure that we have schemes coming through year on year and completions year on year, because we all want keys and doors. One of the challenges, again, that we all collectively face, I feel, is infrastructure and making sure that there's proper infrastructure in place to support development. And that's an across Ireland point. It's not specific to Dublin and Cork, but how can we improve infrastructure so that we can encourage, and I'm sorry, Colin, if you're still in the room, but so that we can encourage and support this 15-minute neighbourhood, because compact growth is absolutely the way that we have to be looking at this. Dublin has more capacity. We know this through our relevant state lands report. So we have to make sure that we're driving that through at every, driving those messages through. The supply chain we heard earlier is an issue and is going to continue to be an issue, as well as, the general planning and JR issues that we have.
So Miguel, building on all of that, Miguel, how do we move the dial from dysfunctional to functional? Like, what would you like to see future governments do, perhaps with different political parties that haven't been done to date? What things would you like to see them do? And presumably it's not all doom and gloom. There must have been some good initiatives from government so far.
Yeah, I think there have been great initiatives, and personally, the age group I'm in, you can certainly point to a lot of friends who've benefited from some of the schemes that are in place. And I think as time goes on, more of those become relevant to a wider part of society, certainly hitting on the affordability points. But if you think about just the spread of what's been done from an affordability perspective, the first home scheme, the new equity scheme from the government, first-time buyer elements, as well as ramping up the LDA, the local authorities, and particularly the approved housing body sector taking a larger and larger slice of delivery as time goes on. That's really positive. It is. We all know someone who's benefited from particularly those starter schemes, but certainly less tinkering would be helpful. We're asking international players to deliver 2/3 of those homes, so it's 6 or 7 out of 10 of every single home we're asking foreign capital for the most part to deliver on. And we do this in an environment where we're kind of changing the game every 6 months or a year. So less tinkering with the system in relation to planning or tax or otherwise would be really helpful, because we're asking these entities, pension funds, insurance groups, etc., to put hundreds of millions at play. And when they do that, they typically expect a certain level of solid ground as to the conditions they're doing it in. So I think that would be really positive as well. And I think something we can do is, try and deal with the NIMBYism issue. And maybe we're looking at the wrong way. We're all complaining about it. But perhaps it's us as an industry that hasn't effectively communicated that apartment standards aren't what they were before. They're not what was delivered in previous cycles. We're delivering very large, high-specification apartments in comparison to our EU neighbours. And when you look at that versus the messaging that's received in the media, it's just simply incorrect and not true. So we need to find a way to challenge that NIMBYism message and educate the public as to the actual standards that are being achieved in buildings today.
And who's the we? Is it government? Is it industry? Both?
It's both. It's both, absolutely. We all have an obligation and responsibility there.
Okay. James, anything in particular you'd like to see?
Well, again, some of the initiatives that have been brought in have been welcomed by us, say the development levies holiday, which is definitely positive in terms of making some schemes viable that may not have been previously, so will help the delivery of units. In some large projects we have that could be in the single digits millions in savings of the cost of delivering a project, so it's definitely going to help delivery, which we welcome. There's obviously a lot of details still to come out on that exact point, and the devil's always in the detail with these things, but it is a welcome initiative. The other thing we think that could be looked at is the VAT rate on new homes. So Miguel kind of touched on it there. It's the capital we're looking to attract to build these units. It's agnostic almost where it goes globally now, and we're fighting for that investment, and we need to attract that investment into Ireland over other jurisdictions, be it Europe or wherever the fund is managed, and it could be global. So that's the kind of environment we're working in. If we look at our nearest neighbour, there's no VAT on new build homes, whereas we do. So straight away, if I'm a fund manager and you're looking at your risk return profile, if the risk profile is similar between here and the UK, straight away, that might be something that switches your focus to our nearest neighbour's jurisdiction. On a global scale, we are, a dot on the map, so we need to put ourselves in a position where we're actually attracting it. And, I'd say we're kind of, on the periphery of Europe, and if something small like that makes the UK more attractive than us, we're just going to lose that investment. So I think, that is absolutely key that we actually attract that investment, and doing something like the VAT rate will reduce the cost of delivery. And I think at the moment, it's, about 40% of the cost of delivering a home is taxes and levies. So I think there is definitely something to be done in that kind of sphere.
Okay. Arlene, good initiatives. Presumably the LDA is a start.
Yeah, absolutely. We are case in point, we are here and we are delivering in the market. And I think, we have to be cognizant that the government have already put legislation in place, they've already put initiatives in place. And perhaps the onus is on us now as a property industry to implement and to act on that. So I'd say that's probably one of the key things that I'd like to drive through on this. There's much better opportunities for collaboration across the market. The LDA are reaching out to the private sector to see where there are opportunities for us to work together. And I think that that's going to be a really important part of going forward now over the next 10 years at least. But it doesn't happen overnight. It is going to take time and persistence, and we have to just keep sort of chipping away at it as such. On the planning side, I don't know whether it would work or not necessarily, but in the UK they have better transparency perhaps around the pre-application process from a planning perspective. So there are planning performance agreements and other arrangements that developers and local authorities can enter into there. So effectively you would pay a fee, enter into a contract, and it allows the local authority to properly resource the review of the application so that they can perform within timescales. That all provides better clarity to the market as well. So I think just de-risking in that way would really help. And maybe from a government perspective, the narrative might need to adapt a little bit. Just in terms of, renting a home is not a bad thing. It's not inferior in any way to home ownership. It's actually a really valid part of the housing cycle. And it's very appropriate, at a point in time. I'm sure everyone in this room has rented in some form or another during their lives to date. So I think, that narrative needs to shift, that it is an appropriate product. It's not that you're boxed into that for life. It's just a stage in time, and it's a product that offers great flexibility, great for people maybe that need a bit more transience. So, I think the narrative might just need to adapt a little bit there as well.
And sticking with maybe products and products assisting, I suppose, in kind of unlocking capacity, to what extent do you think modular housing perhaps might feed into that?
On modular housing, I'd say, we in the industry have been dipping into it already. So we're already using modular housing solutions in some form. There are bathroom pods, there are different arrangements for that. I think perhaps the challenge with going full scale on modular homes at this point is, first of all, we need to make sure that it's thought about at the very early stage of a project. We need to make sure that it's not sort of thought about when we're going out to tender. It has to be, in focus and part of the delivery plan when we're preparing our planning applications, as an example. I think we probably need better reassurance around, the protocols in using modular housing. What's the inspection protocol? What's the sign-off protocol? How does that work? Does that enable us to actually occupy homes? I think if we had better assurances as an industry on the quality, the cost, the programme, if there were benefits there, I think we could definitely look at scaling up in terms of using modular. So I think it is a good option. One thing that we need to be careful of is that we just don't rely too heavily on one sector and one way of delivering. And that diversification point, let's de-risk it.
James, do you want to preempt the poll question? Is modular housing going to play a significant role in your future developments?
I could get this one very wrong. No, I think it will and it should. We should look at every building type, every delivery type that we can. But I think when we've looked at it, Arlene's correct. Like the quality is 100% there, but it needs to be done at scale to make it work, and it needs to be repetition to make it work. And it's not necessarily cheaper, but it's when it gets that scale, it can be quicker, and also obviously that feeds into the cost of delivery and all that. So it should definitely be looked at, and it will. When we've looked at it, one of the issues is around regulation and certification. So that needs to be, really boxed off day one, and because you can't, you won't be able to fund it if you know your certification isn't going to be correct at the end of the project. So that's where we've come up against some issues with it. But as Arlene said, we are doing it in some capacities with bathroom pods and that sort of stuff. So there is elements of buildings being done in modular, but full modular construction, I think it needs to be that regulation certification needs to be watertight before it becomes kind of mass.
And Miguel, will you be announcing Greystar's first fully modular scheme shortly, or is it as yet untested at that scale?
As yet untested, I would say. We did roll out a very large-scale development in Croydon. It was momentarily the tallest modular building in Europe. But certainly, on James's point, certainly repetition and standardization just leads to speed and clarity and being able to execute quickly on stuff. So we're not on site yet with anything in Ireland, but we intend to be. But it's certainly a focus of Greystar in terms of how we look at design, for sure.
Okay. And I suppose moving tack slightly, James, we can't really have any conversation about meaningful conversation about the property market generally without discussing ESG considerations. To what extent is ESG feeding into the developments you're building and planning for the future?
Yeah, I guess it's now front and center in everything that we're doing at the moment. Like, it's no longer kind of the back pages that it's a tick the box or lip service. It's absolutely embedded in everything we're doing. Particularly if I look at the environmental side, with the likes of Fibonacci Square, which delivered its LEED Platinum version 4. Same with the Salesforce headquarters. It's a fully electric building, LEED Platinum as well, and it's the most sustainable building in their global fleet, something that we're really proud of. And I think as an Irish, system, we should be really proud of, because that's delivering sustainability and on a global best practice. So we're really proud of that. And then on the sort of residential side, what we're delivering everything now is, it has to be NZ compliant, it has to be A rated. So I think that's almost de facto at this stage just happening. But I think when we're looking at the environmental side of building, we get caught up on the box, and it's A rated, and but we need to look at the actual everything from land use, and Miguel touched on it earlier, is like, say, regulations making you build basements for cars that they sit empty. In Spencer Dock, we're leasing the apartments there at the moment, and only 10% of the spaces are being taken. So it's the waste of embodied carbon, cost, time, delivering something that is never going to be used. So I think we need to look at fact going forward in stuff like that. And then it comes down to sustainable use of land, and we've been proponents of height and density, but only in the right areas. Say the likes of Dublin's Georgian Core, absolutely sacrosanct. It shouldn't be in the conversation. But the likes of brownfield sites in the Docklands, that's where we need to be looking at sustainable best practice and maximising the use of that land. And there's only one opportunity in a generation to do it, and if we miss that opportunity, it's missed. But we need to use those sites in the most sustainable and environmental friendly way, and that is through, in our view, density. Then you can put in the density there will allow you to put in the infrastructure, even though a lot of it's already in those areas, but it allows you to put in the infrastructure, it allows you to stop the urban sprawl. So it's just the most, it's the best use of land, it's the most sustainable use of land. So that all bakes into ESG policy. So it's not just the box you're talking about and how efficient that is, but it's the whole gamut of land use and everything that goes with it. So that was the whole sphere, the way we'd view it.
Presumably, Arlene, a very live issue for you too, perhaps on the social side?
Yeah, absolutely. It's embedded in our Act. I think it's Section 2, where we have to achieve the best economic and social return. And we also, we've undertaken to comply with the Climate Action Plan as well. So it has to be inherent in everything that we do. When we first look at a site in the initial stages, we have to run through a criteria assessment. Can we get compact growth? What are the transport links? That social aspect of it is really important to us, building communities, fostering that sense of community, decreasing reliance on the car, and going back to the 15-minute neighbourhood point as well, making sure that all of the facilities are around or can be catered for within the proposed development in support of the residential that we'll be bringing forward, because we want to create a secure tenure, we want to provide longevity, and we want people to want to live in the places that we're creating as well. So it's very important to us, absolutely. That social connection is so important, and I think it's inherent in everything that we do. We also have to touch on the environmental and the governance. We have touch points there too. So it's the full package, really.
And spoiler alert, we've had the E, we've had the S. Is the G keeping you busy, and is there an additional cost to that G?
There certainly is. I mean, the structuring and audit and tax elements of running a real estate operation are significant. And I think, maybe before even talking about the clients, just all those elements of work and red tape that you have to go through as legal requirements for the most part are, good safeguards for the industry to have to ensure we're delivering on that governance piece. And when you take in then the clients' views, which are typically pension funds, private equities, insurance groups, etc., they certainly have the most stringent governance practices globally across their portfolios. So it's something that I think, as the professionalized property industry space, particularly in the rental market where we are, you may be a central bank regulated entity. So we are certainly delivering on that governance piece quite significantly and intend to do so into the future. And it's not just a requirement, it's also an aspiration and what the client wants as well. So it's the direction of travel, and like the guys, it's in combination with the other pieces. It's the E, the S, and the G.
Okay, and I suppose maybe if we can try to get everybody a little less, kind of comfortable with the questioning. I suppose for the reasons we've been discussing for the last 20 minutes or so, there's been something of a pause in the market, in the private end of the market, hopefully a short-term pause, and that void has to an extent been filled, thankfully, by the likes of the LDA, the local authorities, the approved housing bodies. And I wonder, Arlene, does that suggest that government housing policy to date has been overly reliant on the private sector to satisfy to solve the housing crisis?
I wouldn't say that there's been an over-reliance on the private sector, and nor would I say that there's been a failure. But I certainly think that there is more room in the market to help bring that delivery forward, and that's what we all need to be focused on collectively. The private sector have contributed through the construction industry and the development industry, delivering social housing in the past, delivering schemes at scale. So I certainly think that, there's precedent there that it can work. It just might need a bit of further support. The state brings forward circa 30% of the housing stock. So there's definitely a very big place and a relevant place for the private sector there. I don't think that the state could come in and ramp up their activity at the expense of the private sector stepping away. I think that just won't work. So I think what the message there really is collaboration is key. We're already looking at how we collaborate with the private sector. We have Project Tussock, so to get things up and running under Project Tussock, we've been working with the private sector to take homes that have already been delivered under management and maintenance so that we have people in homes. Meanwhile, we're working in the background to feed our pipeline, so bringing schemes through, that spatial framework, the master planning, the planning application process. That all takes time, so we have to work with the private sector to find good ways and efficient ways of delivering. So, we're looking at, do we continue to buy more homes that are already there in the market? Do we work with the private market and enter into forward commit agreements in terms of bringing housing stock on board? And also, how can we work with the private sector in terms of actually delivering schemes that the Land Development Agency have got planning permission for or are bringing through the planning process? So is there a hybrid model there that will enable better efficiency in how we deliver and how we ramp up really what we're all collectively bringing forward towards our housing targets? So I definitely think that there is a place for both of us, and that relationship can improve and collaboration can continue.
James, a role for everybody?
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of what Arlene's saying there. I think that every delivery method and every tenure type need to be part of the solution. whether it's public and private separately or in collaboration. And we've delivered almost 1,000 units in joint ventures with CIE, for example, state bodies. So there'd be absolutely no difference in us doing the exact same thing with the likes of the LDA. And I think the targets we need to hit are running further and further away from us, as Ronan touched on earlier. So we need to look at every method of delivery and public, private, and collaboration. There's room for it all, and we need it all. And then we need to look at every single tenure type as well, because the whole goal here is solving the housing crisis, and every tenure type needs to be part of that. And particularly on scale projects, like we're part of the Glass Pottle Consortium delivering that project, and there we're going to have 25% social and affordable. So I think on scale projects there needs to be every tenure type needs to be part of it, and that's going to be the way that we have to look at it to get to a solution we need to get to. So I think on scale projects there needs to be everything from the private sale units to cost rental units to social and affordable units, and I think that needs to be all part of the solution. So I think basically all delivery methods and all tenure types need to be considered and need to be delivered, and yeah, I'd agree exactly with Arlene's saying on that point.
Thanks, James. Miguel?
I think, in agreement with Arlene, she's saying, 30% is going to be delivered by the state. So free market actors need to deliver on the remainder, the 2/3 effectively. But that capital is here because it wants to be here, because it represents a good opportunity, a good return. It does not have to be here, and it doesn't have to continue investing. So my concern is, will that money stay if we continue to change things? And we need to give them something that is viable. And if you look at, I think it's Ronan's projections on, by mid-century, we'll get household sizes of 2.2 people per household. That's 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, effectively, if we want to use the land efficiently. But if we continue to have a system that shoots down apartment development when it is, in fact, what is needed, we're going to continue to hit roadblocks in terms of delivery. So from my perspective, I think it's really that fact-based demographic mission to say people live in apartments comfortably in different European environments. Why can't we? I personally live in an apartment. I'm perfectly happy with it. So that was kind of the direction of travel I was going to take it. And again, we just need the public to become educated to that fact, that we are headed to 2.2 households, or certainly early 2s by mid-century. If we don't deliver that product, we'll have bigger problems, and we certainly won't solve the problem we have today.
Maybe if we move to the rental market, James, the 2% cap is often blamed for creating something of a 2-tier market in a rental market. Is that an oversimplification?
Yeah, I think that is an oversimplification. I think it's the reason we have these interventions in the market is because of the lack of supply. So I think that's the real crux of it, and that's the problem we need to fix. And I do think the kind of 2-tier system has also been exacerbated by the fact that there's been an evolution of the rental market. And if we look at the kind of some of the older stock, it may have poor energy ratings, may not have professional management, it may not have some amenities, maybe none. Whereas the new stock that's coming online, say in our Spencer Place project, we have state-of-the-art gyms, we have co-working facilities, residence lounges, cinemas, games rooms, all the rest. So what's being delivered now in the kind of next phase, or the new phase of the rental sector, it's almost a wraparound lifestyle offering you're giving. It's not just, you're not just renting an apartment, it's not just a box you're giving. So there's a lot more to it, and you're getting a lot more from it. So residents are actually baking this into the cost of rent. So I think that's sort of also baking into the 2-tier system, where you're getting a completely different offering from the kind of the new stock that's coming online.
We're not comparing like with like?
To a certain extent, yeah.
Arlene?
I'll probably be at the other end of the scale then, compared to what James has just said out there. Our key driver at the Land Development Agency has to be looking at affordability, and it's not necessarily, we want to give a good lifestyle, we want to give, great facilities, perhaps through public realm, but we have to be very careful about the types of spaces that we provide within buildings, because we need to keep management and maintenance costs down to provide affordable housing solutions, because what the cost rental product does for us is, we're setting a rent that is directly related to the cost of delivery. So we have to make sure that that is affordable because of the high construction costs associated with delivering the 1 and 2 bedroom apartments that are in much need. So I think we're probably coming at it from a different perspective to the Ronan Group on that one. I would say, across the board, we probably really need to look at what the product is. That's critical, and how we bolster the supply of the product. And I'll echo again Miguel's narrative on the 1 and the 2 beds. We have to be building to what the need is. We have to look at the demographics. Planning policy needs to support, where the housing need is as well, rather than having, just set numbers, plan after plan. We need to make sure that it's targeted towards what the housing need is, I would say. In that way, there probably is 2 parts to the market. Mm-hmm. But, we're all keen, I think, to bring forward this quality of life for residents.
Miguel?
Let me start by saying the build-to-rent sector is only, one small part of the overall solution. So when we're talking about rental, it certainly isn't the solution to the housing situation. And, we're one spoke in a wheel of many solutions to get that done. But if I had kind of one wish to come away from today, it would be decoupling the rent cap from the unit and apply it to the lease. The objective of government is to give security of cash flow for tenants, for long-term tenancies, and we certainly are of the view of holding tenants for as long as possible. It's brilliant for buildings. But if you decouple the rent from the unit and place it on the tenancy, it gives the tenant their required security, but it also stops the situation that's happening at the moment where inflation is chasing institutional landlords and degrading cash flows effectively and valuations, and allows us to get into a point in the market where investors know that this isn't a detriment to long-term valuation. It is a protection for tenants, and it is warranted in the type of inflation environment we're in, but it means the tenant can enjoy 2% or less inflation on their rent, something that's pretty safe and secure, and the investor sentiment can be improved, because if we continue in the situation we're in and inflation continues to ramp up way faster than that 2%, the outlook for Irish residential real estate in terms of viability, in terms of attraction of capital, is just going to be really, really difficult.
Okay. Maybe pulling it all together, James, then, if I can. If we're sitting here next year, if we get you all back for next year's panelists, if we're lucky enough, what do you think the market will be like? Will we have hit the mandated targets? Will we be making inroads into the deficits that Ronan outlined? Or will we be still tinkering with the system? Or will we have been brave enough to have had some kind of whole-scale reevaluation of the system?
Unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball, but as we stand today, I don't think we're going to be hitting our targets. Whether that is, depending where you look, if it's 30, 40 or 60,000, there's not even an agreed consensus on that point. But I don't think we're in a, again, touching on sort of the planning system, if there's over 33,000 units stuck in An Bord Pleanála, if that is the system we're working within, we're not going to hit any targets. And I think that's the first port of call, and that's the first bottleneck that just needs to be opened up, and as soon as possible, through funding and resources of An Bord Pleanála. I think that's just, just has to be done as soon as possible. And then, I think it was touched on earlier about tinkering with the system. Like, all we're doing there is driving away capital. We're putting ourselves up the risk curve, and that tinkering with these projects take time. If you're investing in a real estate project, you could be in it, between planning it for 5 years, 4 years. That's the shortest time frame you're looking at. So, if I'm a fund manager and I'm agnostic about where I'm looking at a spreadsheet and I'm looking at a risk return curve, if I think that policies are going to change 3 or 4 times during the period of my investment, I'm just not going to invest there. And so what we need to do is fundamentally make Ireland an attractive place for investment to come on the private side anyway. And I think that if we are doing any changes, there needs to be fully cognizant of that fact that we want to attract investment into delivering homes in Ireland to alleviate the supply-demand issues. And I think that should be forefront of any changes that are supposed to happen. But the less, the better.
Arlene, how's your crystal ball?
A bit cloudy at the moment. I would say the housing targets, that they're undershot. Just to echo even what Ronan Lyon said earlier this morning, we could be facing an excess of 50,000 units per year. So I would say calling a spade, we're currently not delivering on our targets, but that's not to say that there isn't a willingness. And, I think, again, going back to that point of collaboration, we all want to work together to achieve that, because we want a good news story for Ireland for, to help not only the housing market, but wider inward investment, because it affects all sectors. It's not just residential. This is the building blocks of what we need to do for the overall economy and the performance of the economy. I think just, we have lots of government policies, we have lots of legislation. We need to take action on it, and now is the time for us to, double down our efforts and really pull together as an industry. Shared learning is going to be very important. And I think at the Land Development Agency, our challenge just in terms of trying to meet those targets is always looking at viability and affordability and delivery. How can we ramp up that delivery? So that collaboration point is going to be really important for us.
Thanks. And Miguel, before we hand back to Tom, are you going to close us out on some nice, positive, uplifting sentiment?
It's, just to pull it back to the rental sector, Greystar has been in formalising the rental housing sector as an institutional asset class for around 30 years, 10 in Europe. And certainly coming to Ireland has been a positive experience. But maybe just hit on one point that James alluded to earlier. I can't remember what economist gave it to us, but certainly we had a volatility metric when I joined less than 4 years ago, which placed Ireland at the lowest point of economic, political risk of change and uncertainty around our Irish situation in terms of investing in Ireland. We were at the bottom of the pool, Spain was in the middle, and others were higher. Since that, less than 20 points out of 100, we are now wandering up to sort of 60 or 70. So certainly that risk of uncertainty is being felt by those investors. So it isn't a level playing field anymore. There is this perception by capital that Ireland is a riskier place to invest and that there isn't solid ground. And these are large sums of money. And it's very difficult. Their safest position is make no decision rather than invest in Ireland. And we're an outpost of Europe. We're not Central Europe. We don't have to fund part of that fund's core strategy of Germany, UK, France, etc. They can or cannot come here. So that's my biggest worry.
Is that uplifting?
Yeah. If we don't make it attractive, the money will go elsewhere.
Okay. Guys, thank you very much. It was very informative. I'll hand us back over to Tom now to see if you have any poll questions coming from the app.
Well, thank you to everyone who submitted questions, and Mason, Hayes and Curran will follow up with every single one of them. But just to take a question from one person who says, will the market ever be able to deliver 80 to 90,000 units a year like during the boom, and what needs to change to allow that to happen?
I could probably start with that one. Yeah, I think there you'd probably need to think, was the 80 to 90,000 units during the boom a sustainable housing delivery? We heard earlier from Colm around, the ghost estates and perhaps building to be seen to hit targets, or building but not building in the right way and not building in the right places. I don't think that we would probably go to that level. We obviously are aware that there's a need, but there's a greater need to deliver in a more sustainable way and through compact growth. So I think that probably is a target that we maybe shouldn't be measuring ourselves against, because, you know, there were downfalls with that. I think, you know, looking at housing need is more important, and building what is required is probably more important there, rather than just getting more 3-bed semis, because that's not what we need as a country. We need to provide for the single-person households, or the couples, or the young families. So I think it's more important to look at housing need and delivering the right product, rather than, you know, the scale perhaps that we saw back in the boom time.
And another question here. There is a lot of talk about a wall of money looking to deploy in Ireland. Is that still the case, or has it moved on?
I think I've already spoken to that a bit, but it's kind of asked and answered in a way. But the wall of money exists. It's interested in residential asset classes, but Ireland is an outpost, and they can come here or not. It's as simple as that.
Another question here. Why isn't timber frame construction being used more in Ireland? Do you want to take that on, James?
Yeah, I suppose I'll say something. But yeah, we've actually done a lot of work on this, and it's basically down to regulation. I think Part B of the building regs allow building of timber frame up to 4 stories. So it has been used in some cases, but just not in the vast majority of cases, just because of the regulation piece. But we've looked at a lot of different jurisdictions, the likes of Canada. You can go to 12 stories in timber frame, and we think it's something that really should be looked at, because, you know, we actually, one of our recent projects, we did 2 schemes of it as a case study, one in traditional building methods and one in timber frame. And it was basically to prove the thesis on structural viability and fire. And I think it's a kind of probably an education piece, because it's actually a very fire retardant material, where, you know, against proper belief, people wouldn't think, but it actually chars and basically protects the frame if it burns. So I think it's a regulation piece, and I think it should, if we're really serious about hitting our 2030 and 2050 sustainability targets, and particularly in our environment, embodied carbon in buildings are our big issue. So if we're really serious about it, regulators should really take it on, and it should be top of the agenda. And I think, you know, we are pushing it. I think it's really something that should happen in the short term, and it should be part of our delivery practice here.
We need the insurers to be on board as well, because, you know, we have at times come up against that issue that they're somewhat against or more costly insurance for timber frame buildings.
And I think that there's just time for one more question, which is, will any financial relief that the government seeks to bring in offset the cost increase that inflation has resulted in, as opposed to lowering prices for private purchasers? Does anyone want to take that question on?
I don't think anyone's jumping in on that one. So
I think it just goes back to that viability point. You know, we have pushes and pulls in every direction, and sometimes it feels like playing a game of whack-a-mole, and, you know, when you get one problem sorted, another one pops up. So I think it's trying to take a more holistic approach and making sure that, you know, we have well-considered development appraisals, good risk registers and management strategies across the board. I think it's hard to say. You know, the good thing is that inflation is not hyperinflation anymore, that there's a pullback on that. So it's, as Ronan said this morning, I think it's getting worse, but at a slower rate. So I think that, you know, there's some inroads or some comfort there in respect of inflation, but there are other challenges that we need to look at in the wider process.
Okay, well, look, I think we'll bring the panel to a close now. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Arlene. Thank you, Miguel. And thank you, James.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.